Danny Cole had been working at the Astral Garden for 8 months now. The restaurant floated in the heart of Grand Nexus Station, a massive structure that orbited a quiet moon far from any. Species from across the galaxy came here to talk, to trade, and to eat food that cost more than most people earned in a year. Danny was just a waiter. He carried plates, poured drinks, and smiled at creatures that sometimes had too many eyes or not enough mouths. He did his job well because he needed the money, and because he genuinely liked meeting new people, even if those people were not always human. Today was different from other days. Today, the entire station was buzzing with nervous energy. The Emperor was coming to dine at the Astral Garden. Danny had heard stories about the all his life. They were dragon-like beings who ruled over 47 star systems. They lived for nearly 1,000 years. They breathed fire when angry and could crush a human skull with one clawed hand. Most importantly, they hated humans with a passion that seemed almost personal. Danny stood near the kitchen entrance and watched as his manager, a four-armed named, rushed around adjusting flour arrangements and polishing already spotless surfaces. The staff had been preparing for this visit for 2 weeks. Every detail had to be perfect. They did not forgive mistakes. The Emperor arrived at exactly the scheduled time. His name was, and he was the most powerful being Danny had ever seen in person. He stood over 8 feet tall with scales that shimmered like liquid gold. His eyes burned with inner fire, and when he walked, the floor seemed to tremble beneath his weight. Behind him came a procession of guards and advisors, all dressed in armor that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. But it was not the Emperor who caught Danny's attention. It was the small creature floating in a hovering bassinet beside him, a baby dragon, no bigger than a house cat, with scales of deep purple that caught the light like gemstones. This was the Emperor's only daughter. Danny had read about her in the news feeds. She was just 6 months old, and according to tradition, she had to stay close to her father at all times during her first year of life. The bonding process was sacred to their people. Hurried over to Danny and grabbed his arm. His voice was a harsh whisper. Danny was assigned to the Imperial table. The original server had called in sick, probably too terrified to show up. Danny had experience with difficult guests. He had steady hands. He would have to do. Danny wanted to argue. He knew the Emperor despised humans. Everyone knew. Had given speeches about how humanity was a plague on the galaxy. He called them violent primitives who had somehow stumbled into space travel before they were ready. But Danny also knew that refusing was not an option. He took a deep breath and walked toward the table where the fate of human dignity in this part of the galaxy would rest on his ability to pour wine without spilling. The Emperor did not look at Danny when he approached. He spoke only to, treating Danny as if he were furniture. Danny did not mind. He had dealt with rude customers before. He simply stood at the appropriate distance and waited for instructions. When translated the order, Danny nodded and went to fetch the first course. The meal was an elaborate affair, with 12 courses designed to showcase the finest ingredients from across known space. Danny moved with quiet efficiency, placing dishes and removing empty plates without drawing attention to himself. He noticed that the other diners at nearby tables kept glancing at the Imperial party. Important figures from a dozen different species had come to watch the negotiations between the Imperium and the Consortium of Free Worlds. Politics and food mixed together, in ways Danny did not fully understand. As the evening wore on, Danny found his eyes drawn again and again to Little. She was adorable in a way that transcended species. Her tiny wings would flutter when she was excited. Her tail would curl around her own body when she felt safe. She made small chirping sounds that reminded Danny of the baby birds he used to rescue back home in Nebraska. But something was changing. Danny noticed it around the 5th course, had stopped eating the special nectar that had been prepared for her. Her chirps became less frequent. Her wings, which had been fluttering happily earlier, now lay flat against her back. The shimmer in her scales seemed duller somehow. Danny watched her while pretending to arrange the wine glasses. He had grown up on a farm. He had spent his childhood surrounded by animals of all kinds. He knew what a sick creature looked like and was starting to look sick. The Emperor noticed nothing. He was deep in heated discussion with an ambassador about trade routes and territorial boundaries. His advisors were focused on the political drama unfolding before them. The guards watched for threats from outside, not from within. No one was paying attention to the baby dragon in her bassinet. Danny refilled water glasses and cleared away plates. He kept watching. Her breathing was becoming shallow. Her tiny claws scratched weakly at the soft lining of her bassinet. She was in distress, and she was too young to cry out for help. A cold feeling settled in Danny's stomach. He had seen this before. Years ago, on his family's farm, a young foal had eaten contaminated feed. It had shown the same signs: the dulling of the coat, the loss of appetite, the shallow breathing. That foal had nearly died before Danny's father recognized the symptoms and called the veterinarian. Danny's mind raced. He could not be certain. We're not horses. Their biology was completely different, but poison was poison across most species. Something was wrong with the Emperor's daughter and no one else could see it. He thought about what would happen if he spoke up. Humans were already hated by the. If Danny accused someone of poisoning the imperial air and he was wrong, it could cause a diplomatic disaster. It might even start a war. His own people could suffer because of his mistake. But if he stayed silent and died, he would never forgive himself. Danny watched as the baby dragon's eyes began to close. Her breathing grew even more labored. She was running out of time, and he was the only one who knew it. He made his decision. He would not let a child die because he was afraid of the consequences. Some things mattered more than politics. Some things mattered more than fear. Danny set down the tray he was holding. He stepped toward the imperial bassinet. The guards noticed his movement immediately. Hands went to weapons. The Emperor's conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every eye in the restaurant turned to look at the human waiter who was walking toward the most precious child in the Imperium. Danny did not stop walking. He reached out his hand toward Little, knowing that the next few seconds would change everything. The moment Danny's hand moved toward the bassinet, chaos erupted around him. The guards were fast, faster than any human could ever hope to be. 3 of them drew their plasma rifles and aimed at Danny's chest. 2 more moved to place themselves between the Emperor and this strange human who had apparently lost his mind. The other diners in the restaurant gasped and pushed back from their tables, expecting violence. Emperor rose from his seat. He was magnificent in his fury. His golden scales seemed to glow brighter, and flames flickered behind his teeth as he opened his mouth to speak. His voice was like thunder rolling across mountains. He demanded to know what this creature thought it was doing. Danny did not run. He did not raise his hands in surrender. He looked directly at the Emperor, something that most beings in the galaxy would never dare to do. His voice was calm and steady when he spoke. He told the Emperor that his daughter was dying. Something was wrong with her. She needed help right now. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. He looked at the bassinet where lay. From his angle, the baby dragon appeared to be sleeping peacefully. He saw no danger. He saw only a human who had overstepped his place and insulted the throne. Gave an order, kill him. The guards prepared to fire. Danny had perhaps 2 seconds left to live. He used those seconds to lunge forward, grab from her bassinet, and drop to the floor. The plasma shots passed over his head, scorching the wall behind him. Danny curled his body around the tiny dragon, shielding her with his own flesh. Felt wrong in his arms. She was too cold. Were supposed to be warm, almost hot to the touch. This baby felt like a stone that had been left in the shade. Her breathing was barely there, just the smallest movement of her chest against Danny's hands. He scrambled to his feet and ran. The kitchen was only 20 feet away. Danny burst through the swinging doors and shouted for the medical kit. The cooking staff scattered in confusion. A guard appeared in the doorway behind him, weapon raised. Danny did not have time to explain. He sat on a clean counter and grabbed the emergency kit from the wall. His hands moved on instinct. He had no training in alien medicine. He had no knowledge of biology, but he knew what poison looked like, and he knew what might counter it. The symptoms pointed to some kind of metal toxicity. Scales had lost their luster in a pattern that reminded Danny of lead poisoning in animals. The way she had stopped eating suggested her body was trying to reject something harmful. Her shallow breathing meant her organs were struggling. Danny found activated charcoal in the kit. It was a common remedy used by many species to absorb toxins. He mixed it with water and added calcium powder from the mineral supplements section. His father had used something similar on the farm when animals ate things they should not have eaten. The guard in the doorway hesitated. He could see that the human was trying to help the child, but his orders were clear. He raised his weapon again. Danny ignored him. He tilted his tiny head back and gently opened her mouth. Her tongue was pale instead of the bright orange it should have been. He poured a small amount of the mixture into her mouth and used his fingers to massage her throat, helping her swallow. Nothing happened. Lay limp on the counter. Her eyes remained closed. Danny felt his heart breaking. He was too late. He had tried his best, but he was just a waiter from Nebraska. What did he know about saving alien princesses? Then coughed. A stream of black liquid came out of her mouth, staining the counter and Danny's shirt. She coughed again, her whole body shaking with the effort. More black liquid spilled out. Danny turned her on her side to help her expel the poison. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds, took a deep breath. A real breath. Her chest rose and fell with strength. Her scales began to shimmer again, just a little, but enough to notice. She opened her eyes and looked up at Danny with confusion. The kitchen doors slammed open. Emperor filled the doorway, his massive form blocking out the light from the restaurant behind him. His guards flanked him on both sides. His face was a mask of rage and fear, and something else Danny could not identify. The Emperor saw his daughter in the arms of a human. He saw her covered in dark fluid. He saw her lying on a kitchen counter like a piece of meat waiting to be prepared. A roar erupted from his throat that shook the pots hanging from the ceiling. The sound was primal and terrifying, the cry of a father who believed his child had been harmed. But then chirped. It was a weak sound, but it was unmistakably happy. She saw her father and recognized him. Her tiny tail began to wag like a puppy greeting its owner. She tried to lift her wings, though she was still too weak to spread them fully. The Emperor froze. The rage in his eyes flickered. He stared at his daughter, then at the human holding her, then at the black liquid pooled on the counter. His ancient mind began to piece together what had actually happened here. Danny spoke softly. He explained that someone had poisoned the baby's nectar. He described what he had noticed during the meal. He told the Emperor that he had done what he could with the supplies available, but needed real medical attention from people who understood biology. Approached slowly. His guards kept their weapons trained on Danny, waiting for the order to fire. The Emperor reached out with one massive clawed hand and touched his daughter's head, chirped again and nuzzled against his palm. She was alive. She was breathing. She was looking at her father with love in her tiny eyes. The Emperor looked at Danny for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. 1,000 years of wisdom and experience churned behind those burning eyes. He had just watched a human risk death to save a child. He had just witnessed something that contradicted everything he believed about this species. He gave a single command to his guards: "Lower your weapons." The guards hesitated. One of them pointed out that the human had attacked the Imperial heir. Protocol demanded execution. Turned his head slowly to look at the guard who had spoken. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. He said that this human had not attacked his daughter. This human had saved her life. Any guard who fired on him would answer to the Emperor personally. The weapons lowered. Danny finally allowed himself to breathe. The station's medical team arrived moments later, alerted by the restaurant staff. They took from Danny's arms with gentle efficiency. The Emperor followed them, but not before casting one last look at the human waiter who had just turned his entire understanding of the galaxy upside down. Danny stood alone in the kitchen, covered in black poison and sweat. His hands were shaking now that the danger had passed. He had no idea what would happen next. He only knew that he had done the right thing, and for now, that was enough. The medical bay of Grand Nexus Station was one of the most advanced facilities in this sector of the galaxy. Doctors from 30 different species worked there, equipped with technology that could heal wounds that would be fatal anywhere else. When Emperor arrived carrying his daughter, the entire staff dropped whatever they were doing and rushed to help. Danny was escorted to a waiting area by two guards who clearly did not know what to do with him. He was neither a prisoner nor a guest. He was something in between, a problem that would need to be solved by someone with more authority. So they put him in a chair and stood on either side of him, watching his every move. Hours passed. Danny sat in silence. His shirt was still stained with the black poison he had extracted from. His hands had finally stopped shaking, but a deep exhaustion had settled into his bones. He thought about his family back on Earth. He thought about his mother, who had cried when he left for the stars. He wondered if she would ever know what had happened here tonight. A doctor emerged from the treatment room. She was tall and thin with silver skin that reflected the harsh medical lights. She approached the guards and spoke in a language Danny did not understand. The guards exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to something that might have been surprise. One of the guards turned to Danny and spoke in accented galactic common. The human was to be brought before the Emperor, immediately. Danny stood on legs that felt weak and followed the guards through the station's corridors. They walked for what seemed like miles, passing through security checkpoints and restricted areas until they reached a section of the station Danny had never seen before. This was where the delegation had set up their temporary headquarters. Everything here was grander, more ornate, designed to reflect the power and majesty of the Imperium. The guards stopped before a massive door covered in golden symbols. One of them pressed a panel on the wall, and the door slid open to reveal a private chamber. Emperor stood near a window that looked out into the infinite darkness of space. He was alone except for his daughter, who slept peacefully in a medical cradle beside him. Danny entered the room. The door closed behind him. The guards remained outside. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The Emperor continued to stare out the window, his back to Danny. When he finally turned around, his expression was calm but troubled. He gestured for Danny to come closer. Danny walked across the room until he stood just a few feet from the most powerful being in 47 star systems. Up close, the Emperor was even more impressive. His scales seemed to contain entire galaxies, swirling patterns of gold and amber that shifted as he moved. His eyes held a depth of experience that made Danny feel like a child. The Emperor spoke. His voice was softer now, stripped of the thunder it had carried in the restaurant. He said that the doctors had confirmed the poison. It was called a compound designed specifically to kill infants. It worked slowly, mimicking natural illness until it was too late, had perhaps 15 minutes left when Danny intervened. Danny nodded. He did not know what to say. The Emperor continued. His investigators had already identified the culprit. A servant belonging to a rival noble house had tampered with nectar. The assassination was meant to look like natural causes, a tragedy that would weaken the Emperor's position and throw the succession into chaos. The servant had been arrested and would face justice. Danny felt relief wash over him. At least he had not been wrong about the poison. At least his instincts had been correct. But the Emperor was not finished. He took a step closer to Danny, his massive form casting a shadow over the human. He asked a question that seemed to carry the weight of centuries behind it. Why did you do it? Danny blinked. He was not sure he understood the question. The Emperor clarified. Danny was human. Humans were despised by the. Danny had no connection to, no obligation to protect her. By acting as he did, Danny had risked his own life and potentially caused a diplomatic incident that could have harmed his entire species. From a logical perspective, the smart thing to do would have been to stay silent and let events unfold as they may. So why did Danny choose to intervene? Danny thought about the question. He supposed he could give a complicated answer about moral philosophy or universal rights or the obligations of sentient beings to protect the innocent. But that was not really why he had done it. He shrugged and said simply that he saw a baby who was in trouble. He could not just stand there and watch her die. Species did not matter. Politics did not matter. She was just a little kid who needed help, and he was in a position to help her. That was all there was to it. The Emperor stared at him for a long time. Danny could not read his expression at all. Finally, turned and walked back to the window. He spoke with his back to Danny again. He said that he had lived for 900 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had negotiated with every major species in the galaxy. He had studied the histories of 1,000 worlds and the philosophies of 10,000 cultures. He thought he understood how the universe worked. He had believed that humans were dangerous because they were violent. He had seen their history of wars and conflicts. He had observed how quickly they bred and how aggressively they expanded. He had concluded that they were a threat that needed to be contained before they caused harm to the established order. But tonight, a human waiter had thrown himself in front of plasma fire to save a child he had never met. Tonight, a human had acted without calculation, without self-interest, without any consideration for his own survival. He had done it simply because he could not bear to watch a child suffer. The Emperor turned to face Danny once more. His expression had changed. The suspicion was gone. In its place was something that might have been respect or wonder or perhaps the beginning of understanding. He said that perhaps he had been wrong about humans. Perhaps they were not dangerous because they were violent. Perhaps they were dangerous because they cared too much, too quickly, for too many. A species that could produce individuals willing to die for strangers was not something to be contained. It was something to be studied, and perhaps, eventually, to be embraced. Danny did not know how to respond to that. He just stood there, a tired waiter in a stained shirt, receiving words of praise from an emperor. Walked past him toward the medical cradle where slept. He looked down at his daughter with an expression of profound tenderness. Then he looked back at Danny and said that he would not simply reward the human for what he had done. A reward was too small for this. Instead, he would do something that had never been done in the entire history of the Imperium. Danny asked what that meant. The Emperor smiled, showing teeth that could crush steel. Danny would find out soon enough. 3 days had passed since Danny saved life. During that time, he had been given quarters in the diplomatic section of Grand Nexus Station. The room was nicer than any place he had ever lived, with a comfortable bed and a window that looked out at the stars. Meals were delivered to his door by station staff who looked at him with expressions of awe and confusion. Word had spread about what he had done, though the details remained unclear to most people. Danny spent most of his time sleeping and thinking. He had not been allowed to return to work at the Astral Garden. His manager had sent a message saying that Danny was technically still employed, but that the situation was complicated. Humans saving princesses was not something the employee handbook covered. On the morning of the 4th day, an official appeared at Danny's door. She was a female with scales of deep blue and eyes that sparkled like stars. She introduced herself as Counselor Eth, personal advisor to Emperor. She had been sent to escort Danny to an important ceremony. Danny asked what kind of ceremony. The counselor smiled mysteriously and said he would understand when they arrived. They walked through the station's corridors together, drawing stares from everyone they passed. A human walking alongside a high-ranking official was not something people saw every day. Danny felt self-conscious in the simple clothes he had been given. He wished someone had told him to dress for a formal occasion. The counselor led him to the largest assembly hall on Grand Nexus Station. It was a vast space designed to hold representatives from dozens of species during major diplomatic events. Today, it had been decorated with banners and symbols. Golden lights bathed everything in a warm glow. Danny stopped at the entrance and stared. The hall was filled with people, not just but representatives from nearly every major species in the consortium of free worlds. Ambassadors sat beside scientists. Merchants stood next to human diplomats who looked almost as confused as Danny felt. All of them turned to look at him when he appeared in the doorway. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, stood Emperor in full ceremonial regalia. His armor gleamed with jewels and precious metals. His crown was a circlet of flame that burned without consuming. Beside him, in her own tiny version of the imperial robes, sat in a hovering cradle. She was awake and alert, her purple scales shimmering with healthy light. Counselor Eth guided Danny down the central aisle toward the platform. He felt every eye in the room following his movement. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. He had no idea what was about to happen. When he reached the platform, the Emperor raised one hand for silence. The hall fell quiet immediately. Spoke in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. He told the assembled gathering that they had come to witness an event without precedent in history. 4 days ago, his daughter, heir to the throne of the Imperium, was poisoned by an assassin seeking to end his bloodline. She would have died if not for the actions of a single individual who risked everything to save her. The Emperor gestured toward Danny. This individual was not. He was not even a species that the had traditionally counted as allies. He was human, a waiter, a servant in a restaurant. And yet, when faced with the choice between safety and saving an innocent child, he chose the child without hesitation. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some species looked surprised, others looked skeptical. A few of the humans present looked proud. The Emperor continued. In the culture, there was no higher honor than protecting a child. The bonds between parent and offspring were sacred, the foundation upon which their entire civilization was built. Anyone who protected a child was considered worthy of the highest recognition, regardless of their species or station. He announced that Danny Cole would be granted the title of Kin Protector. This was a sacred bond that had existed in tradition for 10,000 years. It meant that Danny would be considered part of the imperial family itself. He would have diplomatic immunity throughout all territories. He would be welcomed in any home. He would be defended by warriors as if he were blood. The hall erupted in whispers and gasps. Danny heard someone explain to a confused ambassador what this meant. No one had ever received this honor. It was considered impossible for an outsider to earn such trust. The Emperor stepped down from the platform and approached Danny directly. He produced a medallion from his robes, a golden disc etched with symbols that seemed to glow with inner fire. He placed it around Danny's neck and spoke words in the ancient tongue that Danny could not understand but somehow felt in his bones. When the ritual was complete, the Emperor placed one massive hand on Danny's shoulder. He spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. He said that he had spent centuries believing that humans were a mistake. He had thought they were primitive creatures who stumbled into space before they were ready. He had argued against allowing them into galactic society. He had been wrong. This human, this waiter, had shown more courage and compassion in a single moment than many species had demonstrated in of existence. He had acted without calculation, without self-interest, without any hope of reward. He had simply seen a child in need and done what needed to be done. The Emperor looked out at the assembled representatives. He told them that the Imperium would be revising its position on humanity. The trade negotiations that had been interrupted by the assassination attempt would resume, but with new terms. Humans would be given full partner status in the Imperium's economic agreements. Cultural exchanges would be established. Military cooperation would be considered. This was not charity. This was recognition. The honored strength, and they had seen strength in humanity that they had not expected to find. Danny stood frozen, overwhelmed by what was happening. He had just wanted to save a baby. He had not intended to change galactic politics. He did not know how to respond to being called the hope of his species. But then something happened that cut through all the formality and grandeur. Little, who had been watching the ceremony from her cradle, suddenly spread her tiny wings and flew. It was a clumsy, wobbly flight, the kind that baby dragons managed only when they were very determined. She crossed the distance between her cradle and Danny in a few seconds and landed on his shoulder. She nuzzled her small head against his cheek and made a sound of pure contentment. Her tail wrapped around his arm for balance. The hall fell silent again, but this time the silence was filled with wonder. Even the officials looked astonished. Counselor Eth whispered that infants never showed affection to anyone outside their immediate bloodline. It was biologically impossible. And yet here was the imperial heir, treating a human like family. The emperor watched his daughter curl against Danny's neck. His expression softened in a way that made him look almost gentle. He said quietly that perhaps understood something that the adults were only beginning to grasp. Perhaps she recognized in Danny what he truly was. A protector, a guardian, a friend. Danny reached up carefully and stroked scales. They were warm now, the way they should be. She chirped happily and closed her eyes, falling asleep on his shoulder as if she had known him all her life. For the first time since this whole adventure began, Danny smiled. 6 months had passed since the ceremony that changed Danny Cole's life. The galaxy had shifted in ways both large and small, and at the center of it all was a former waiter from Nebraska who still could not quite believe what had happened to him. The news of the Kim Protector ceremony had spread across known space within days. Every major news network carried the story. A human waiter saves princess and is adopted into the imperial family. It sounded like something from a fairy tale, but it was true, and it had consequences that no one could have predicted. Other species began to look at humanity differently. If the proud and ancient could change their minds about humans, perhaps there was more to these newcomers than anyone had realized. Trade agreements that had been stalled for years suddenly moved forward. Diplomatic doors that had been firmly closed began to open. Humans were invited to conferences and summits where they had previously been ignored. Danny received offers from across the galaxy. Governments wanted to hire him as a diplomat. Corporations offered him positions with salaries that had more zeros than he could count. Universities asked him to give lectures about relations. Everyone wanted a piece of the human who had touched the heart of an empire. He turned them all down. Instead, Danny asked Emperor for permission to return to his job at the Astral Garden. The request was so unexpected that the Emperor actually laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound that shook the windows of the throne room. The Emperor asked why Danny would want to go back to being a waiter when he could have anything in the galaxy. Danny thought about the question carefully before answering. He said that he liked being a waiter. He liked meeting people. He liked making them feel welcome and ensuring they had a good meal. That was who he was before all this happened, and he did not want to become someone else just because circumstances had changed. The Emperor studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded and said that humans were indeed strange creatures. He gave his blessing. So Danny returned to the Astral Garden, though his life there was very different from before. His manager treated him with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. He asked endless questions about what it was like to be royalty. The restaurant became one of the most popular destinations on Grand Nexus Station because people wanted to be served by the famous human who had saved a princess. Danny handled it all with the same calm efficiency he had always shown. He carried plates. He poured drinks. He smiled at customers and made sure their meals were memorable. The golden medallion of the Kin Protector hung around his neck, but otherwise he looked like any other waiter doing his job. The real changes happened during his time off. As a member of the imperial family, Danny was invited to gatherings and celebrations. He attended naming ceremonies for newborn dragons and memorial services for elders who had passed. He learned bits of the language and customs. He made friends among a species that had despised humanity just a few months earlier. And of course there was. The little princess had grown significantly since Danny first held her in the restaurant kitchen. She was the size of a medium dog now, with wings strong enough to carry her across a room in a single flight. Her purple scales had deepened to a rich violet that caught the light like captured nebulae. She was smart and curious, and absolutely certain that Danny belonged to her. Whenever the Emperor brought his daughter to Grand Nexus Station, would immediately seek out Danny. It did not matter if he was working or sleeping or trying to have a private moment. She would find him, land on his shoulder, and refuse to leave until she was good and ready. The other restaurant guests quickly learned to accept that their waiter might have a baby dragon perched on him while he took their orders. The Emperor watched this bond develop with an expression that shifted over time from surprise to acceptance to something that might have been gratitude. His daughter had nearly been taken from him. She had been saved by a human who asked for nothing in return. Every time Saw curled happily against Danny's neck, he was reminded of how wrong his assumptions had been. One evening, the Emperor came to the astral garden without his entourage. He was disguised in simple robes, looking like any other wealthy traveler seeking a good meal. Danny recognized him immediately, of course, but said nothing. He simply led the Emperor to a quiet table near the window and handed him a menu. They talked for hours. The Emperor spoke about the burden of leadership and the loneliness of being responsible for billions of lives. Danny spoke about growing up on a farm and the satisfaction of doing honest work. They discovered that despite their vast differences, they understood each other in ways that surprised them both. At the end of the evening, as the Emperor prepared to leave, flew over from wherever she had been exploring and landed between them. She looked at her father, then at Danny, and made a chirping sound that seemed to express satisfaction at having her two favorite people in the same place. The Emperor placed his massive hand on Danny's shoulder, the same gesture he had made during the ceremony 6 months earlier. He said that his daughter had never shown such affection to anyone outside their bloodline before Danny came into their lives. Children were supposed to bond only with family. Behavior everything they understood about their own biology. He admitted that he once thought humans were the galaxy's greatest mistake. He had given speeches about containing them, limiting them, keeping them from spreading their chaos across the stars. He had been so certain that they were dangerous. Now he wondered if they might be the galaxy's greatest hope, not because they were strong or advanced or numerous, but because they cared about things that did not concern them. They formed attachments that made no sense. They risked their lives for strangers. They looked at a universe full of differences and saw connections instead of boundaries. Danny did not know what to say to that. He was just a waiter. He had never thought of himself as anyone's hope for anything. The Emperor smiled, showing teeth that could crush steel but somehow did not seem threatening anymore. He said that perhaps that was exactly the point. Danny did not see himself as special. He simply did what he believed was right without worrying about politics or consequences or personal gain. That kind of simple goodness was rarer than any treasure in the galaxy. He thanked Danny for saving his daughter. He thanked him for opening his eyes. He thanked him for giving an ancient emperor the chance to learn something new after 900 years of thinking he knew everything. Then he called for his daughter and reluctantly left Danny's shoulder to join her father. They walked out of the restaurant together, the mighty emperor and his little princess, leaving Danny alone with the stars. Danny stood by the window for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. He had come to this station to pay off his debts and maybe see some interesting things. He had not expected to change the fate of his species or become family to dragons. Life was strange that way. He picked up his serving tray and got back to work. There were customers waiting and tables to clear and drinks to pour. The galaxy could worry about itself for a while. Danny had a job to do. And somewhere out there, traveling back to a throne that ruled 47 star systems, a little dragon with purple scales was already looking forward to the next time she would see her favorite human.